G'day everyone, I wanted to make this video just to run over how to play minor nations, because it's usually the majors that get all the love, your Germanys, the Soviets, America and the UK and whoever, so they're not the only countries in the game. Sometimes it is fun just to jump on like a Colombia or a Venezuela or, you know, whoever, and just sort of start small and build up. So that's what I wanted to give you a bit of an idea about today. And what do we mean by a generic nation? So it's any country that just has the basic focus tree without sort of the flavor packs, the DLCs attributed to it. So it could just be that that particular nation doesn't have a DLC for it, like Nepal or the South American countries or most of the Middle Eastern nations. Or it could just be that you personally don't own the DLCs for that. So like most of the European countries have a basic focus tree if you don't have the DLCs. Let's jump into Colombia just to sort of demonstrate what we mean. This is the basic tree, the generic focus tree. It's what's going to appear for most countries, like I said, if you don't have the DLC to give them that unique flavor. It's pretty easy to understand once you sort of break it down. The left-hand tree is just for your army. It gives you a bunch of different research boosts for like your weapons, trucks, armor, special forces, things like that. Then you've got your aviation tree, the Air Force tree, which is this one here. So that can give you boosts to like, yeah, your fighter models, which is actually like quite powerful. Given that when you're starting out, you don't really have a lot of techs. Most of the sort of minor nations don't have any techs that they start out with, so these sorts of research boosts help you catch up quite a lot. Then you've got the naval tree. The first one usually gives you some dockyards to get you started, and then you've got your industry tree. This is probably one of the main ones you should start out with. This is going to give you sort of like a basis of military factories, civilian factories, infrastructure, things like that, as well as your extra research slots here. As a minor nation or a generic nation, you can only get a maximum of 4 research slots, and to get your 4th one you need to have more than 50 factories. So pretty important to go down and get this sooner rather than later. You're already a bit hamstrung by only starting off with 2. And then on the right hand side is your political tree. This is where you can sort of steer your nation to go communist or fascist if you go down the left hand side here for the collectivist ethos, or you can stay democratic, go neutral. What I would recommend you to start with in terms of your focuses is if you're wanting to go for a fascist or a communist playthrough, it's always easier to pick a nation that already starts off as fascist, such as like Peru or Venezuela. Both of those would allow you to start justifying and declaring on nations straight away. But if you want to start as like a democratic or non-aligned, then I would begin with the political effort and then come down and try to get these focuses here. So for example, these first 2 are going to increase your daily fascism communism support for 3 years. It's really going to help you get that rolling and sort of change your government quite easily. It's usually, the civil war is usually the easiest way to change your government. It's usually the fastest way. I have a guide on how to do civil wars, which I'll link in the description. But basically, you just delete all of your divisions. You just leave 1 in training. And then you just take the decisions to fire the civil war. Once it happens, you can deploy that 1 division and then just run around and take all the victory points before your enemy has enough time to deploy theirs. So again, I'll go into more detail in that other video. But if you are wanting to change your government type, first thing you need to do, go for the political effort, get that political power. All these generic countries, you start off with your advisors sort of unlocked. So you can go for the fascist demagogue or the communist one pretty much straight away and start increasing your support there. So that will be your first step if you're looking to have a bit more of an interesting playthrough. So we'll start with that now. Once you go through and you've started to get that support for either fascism or communism, fascism, whatever. Once you start to get that support, then the industrial sector or the industrial focuses are the best way to go. Any nation which doesn't have some sort of special flavor on it generally is going to have a very small industry. It's still worth building civilian factories, even though it takes quite a long time. You're going to need them later on, and often the countries that you're taking over, you may not have them as cores. You're going to have the compliance build up to actually get use of those factories. You're better off just having your own as a base. Generally, it's a good idea to start building those civilian factories, and then I would recommend doing at least these 2 focuses first for those free 2 construction factories before you even look at the military ones. It's ideal to come down to construction effort 3. It'll give you 4 free civilian factories, and I mean at this point in time that's basically going to double what production we currently have, so it's well worth doing that. And for your research techs as well, very similarly, you want to kind of focus on your industrial techs. You're going to be looking at war maybe in 37, 38 at the very earliest. So building up your industry so that you actually have a chance of winning is worth doing. Of course, like I said, some nations don't start with particular base level tech, so research your artillery, research trains and trucks and things like that. That being said though, it's probably only worth producing trains, especially early on. You're not really going to have the civilian or the military factories to apply to a lot of your supply based equipment. Going off that as well, with your templates, again, usually start out with some pretty crappy templates. Like this here, 8 width, like 13 soft attack. It's pretty horrible. Another thing is it starts off with engineers, which currently I don't think we even have the support equipment. Okay, so we do have the support equipment tech, but we only have one military factory. So how are we going to be able to produce the equipment needed to supply an army's worth of divisions? We're just not. So try to take off that, consolidate your forces at the most. If you can get a pretty consistent sort of like 18 to 20 width division, that's going to be ideal. But a lot of the time you won't have the manpower or equipment. So even just going with something a bit smaller, even like a 12 width will be fine. And once you start getting a couple of military factories, you have maybe 1 or 2 on artillery, then you can add in your support artillery, and then suddenly this division is going to be somewhat useful, particularly against other minor nations. You're going to have a bit of an easier time of it. And then for like your doctrines and your political power and things like that, definitely get the silent workhorse. You're going to need a lot of political power. It's always worth grabbing. Aside from that, you want to go for the demagogue or the revolutionary. That's going to increase your support. And then you kind of want to work towards getting partial mobilization or war economy as soon as you can. And same thing, if you don't have a lot of natural resources, just jump on a free trade. As Colombia, we don't even have any natural resources here, just our oil. So what's the point of sitting on export focus when we don't have any resources to export? Jump on free trade, get the construction boost, get the output boost, get the research boost. I would usually start off with machine tools anyway for my research and the electrical engineering. You do want to make sure you're getting your research boosts as well. You start off on the back foot, so you don't really want to be throwing away any research boosts that you can get that might help you catch up a little bit. So I just jumped over to Peru here. Starting off as fascist, they have the benefit that you can actually just find people straight away. We're still going to go for the political power. We're also timing that so that our industry boost would be applied to, you know, something like our construction 2 or industry 2 or something like that. We're still going to build civilian factories to begin with. We have quite a small army. Again, the templates suck. Like, you can see the situation's pretty much the same, regardless of which nation that you're playing as. In terms of like what your overall goal should be, I mean, it's really up to you. Like, for example, if I'm playing as South America, I'm going to try and want to revive Bolivar's legacy. So what do we need for that? We need Panama, Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela. Pretty much these countries. What else is sort of going on here? So all of these South American nations are guaranteed by the US because of the Monroe Doctrine, right? The thing is, you can generally declare war on a couple of them before the US will actually act on their guarantee. If we're looking at like what our overall goal is, this gives us cause on everything. That's going to make us quite strong. So if we can justify on Ecuador, Colombia, and Panama, the only other threat here really is Venezuela. They're also fascist. They're going to have like a lot more divisions and everything to start with. So if we can take out these other nations, sort of consolidate, build up, get a bit more like their size, it's going to help us out in that long run. You could also, for example, go for these other smaller nations down here like Bolivia, Argentina, where there's actually more resources that you could trade for. You sort of need to factor all that sort of stuff into your equation. Keep in mind which countries are guaranteeing others. Like, for example, in Europe, if you're playing as one of these nations, these guarantees they will act on. So, like, if you're playing as Bulgaria, you jump onto fascist and you're like, oh, I'm going to take out Romania real early. You're going to have to go to war with a lot of other nations too. And on top of that, later in the game, the Soviets are going to want to have a bit of interest in that area. So you sort of need to plan a bit of it, like you need to plan ahead a bit. Maybe if I do take out Romania, France can't actually reach you at this point here. Especially once the Turks cut off the channel, the Czechs can. So that you're basically going to be fighting Romania and the Czechs. Are you going to have the strength to do that straight away? Probably not. So what you could do instead is maybe go for Greece. They're guaranteed by Romania. And then it'll be Romania declaring war on you, not you declaring war on them. So France and the Czechs won't come into that. Does that make sense? Like, let me know in the comments if I'm not really explaining that well. You can kind of tactically justify on people that are guaranteed to bring in other nations into the war. Here's a good example though. Hungary, at the start of the game, in their generic, like they do have a unique tree that you can get if you have the DLC, but with their generic tree, you can go ahead, jump to fascist, take over Austria, and then again, Czechoslovakia is guaranteed by France and Romania. France has no land border with you. So how are they going to get to you? There's no sea border. They can't naval invade you. So you could go ahead and justify in Czechoslovakia. You would, of course, be at war with Romania at the same time. But if you're good, you can pull it, and then you'll be able to take out both of them. Particularly if you beat Germany to the punch. And then all of a sudden, you've got all of this land. Sure, you're at war with the French and probably the rest of the Allies, but then you've got a lot of space to work with. Particularly early in the game, when you don't have the civilian factories or the military factories, just industry in general to work with, don't worry too much about your navy or your air force. If you're going to be building any kind of air force, it's easy enough to say get the interwar airframe and then the bombs, but then you also need the engines to be able to like make a close air support plane. If you don't have Fireblood alone and you've just got the base game, just get interwar close air support and just put like 1 or 2 factories on them a little bit later on as you get them, and that in itself is going to help you out a lot with your wars. So close air support, like a lot of the other minor nations you'll be attacking won't have an air force of their own. There are other things to keep in mind as well, particularly in your decisions tab. Things like commandeering civilian trains. It'll cost you a little bit of stability, but it's going to help you out with your overall logistics. These raids, if you do the anti-democratic or communist raids, tanks your stability to begin with, but then in the long run, you end up gaining like 2 or 3% stability. And it also reduces like the democratic support. The more support you have for your type of government, the more stability and war support and everything that you get as well on top of that. So it's kind of like a compounding effect. And again, with the Navy, you're usually going to start out with pretty average Navy. It's worth exercising them just to get the free bit of XP for it, because later on, if you do want to start producing a Navy, you're going to need that to make your designs and whatever. Your Navy early in the game is sort of best used either to naval invade enemy nations that may not have one themselves. So rather than just like attacking through here, you can naval invade around. Keep in mind though, again, most nations don't start out with the transport ship technology. So you're going to have to research that. Yeah, you kind of have to really look at what you've got. Most nations don't even start out with hulls or like the gunnery researched. So if you want to build a Navy, you know, the amount of technologies that you need to make a somewhat useful Navy, it really starts ramping up. And keep in mind, you've only got a couple of slots. So is it worth really wasting all that time and effort doing all that when you could just go instead for like your artillery, go for your infantry equipment or your industry and stuff? Like, probably not. So right here is Peru. We've got our first 150 political power. We could either go straight to war economy, or we could jump over and we could get the silent workhorse. That's kind of like a consistent thing which will help you throughout your entire game. The more political power, the more of these government things that you can do. And again, like more of an edge that's going to give you over your rivals. Yeah, you can kind of like angle it either way. Peru doesn't really have any resources either. So free trade's definitely an option here too. You could up your conscription laws. Keeping in mind, 70,000 is not a lot against a major, but against most minor players, 70,000 is quite a lot of manpower. So to begin with, we'll probably go for the silent workhorse. And then the next thing that we'll go for is war economy. If you have like a genius level chief of army or anything, save up and get them. It's well worth it. Keep in mind, you're also going to have to basically like be building your army up from scratch. The major nations have all this done for them. That's why they're majors. They have such an advantage over all the other smaller players. So you've got to find a way to do more with less, I guess. Anytime you can get like an infantry expert, for example, like, or the logistics, particularly in like South America, or if you're playing as like Iran or Iraq or someone like that in the Middle East, pretty much anywhere a minor nation is situated, it's going to have pretty crappy supply. So yeah, they're always good ones to get as well. Do you want to go ahead and use your political power and command power for a chief of the Navy? Like, what's the point if you're not producing them, you know? So just save that, use it on the army, just apply that sort of stuff in a better way. Speaking of applying your resources, I guess in a more efficient manner, you don't really need to worry about getting an intelligence agency. Particularly early on, you aren't going to have enough. Like, what's the point here? We're going to be able to beat Ecuador and Colombia, pretty much no worries. Are we going to be able to build a collaboration government in them? No, we don't have the civilian factories or the support equipment for that. And then what's the point in collaborating countries that we're going to end up getting calls on anyway? This is a bit of a contentious point as well, but I would say that playing as a miner is one of the times where having concentrated industry is actually worth it. Only though if you're playing as a miner nation which has a lot of manpower. So any one of the Chinese nations, if you don't have the DLCs, what you can do is just have a bunch of factories on the very cheapest infantry equipment, go on a concentrated, and you're going to get a lot more guns out of that over the long term. But if you're upgrading your production lines, it's not worth doing that. If you have the military to do it from the beginning of the game, you're definitely better off justifying your war goals sooner rather than later. The lower the world tension, the longer your war goals take, regardless of what ideology you are. So definitely worth getting on top of that early, even before you go to war economy or pick up your advisors and stuff like that. Touching on the templates again, like your division design, I mentioned that it's worth sort of sticking with whatever your basic one is at the start of the game, especially if that's all you can really sustain. Definitely more divisions are better than like only 2 or 3 actually good ones. So don't be afraid to go with just sort of like 10 width infantry to begin with. They'll serve their purpose, especially if you have more of them. But eventually you are going to want to increase them slowly as you get more manpower and equipment and production and everything. To be something more like this, you've just got your artillery, AA, and your infantry. Now, really what's sort of most important is just this. You can get away with just having a production line of a couple of factories on artillery and a few on guns, and that'll sustain you with this sort of design. But eventually you're going to want to add on AA, maybe like your engineers, things like that, particularly if you're going to be going up against major players, you know, US, UK, Germany, people like that. In that case, definitely having maybe 12 to 24 divisions, which are really good, are going to help win you the day. Because if you're going up against a country which has, you know, 50, 60 plus divisions, and they're decent, your shitty little 10 wits, regardless of how many you have, they're not going to help you out at all. Likewise with your doctrines, I generally recommend superior firepower if you're going for like an infantry heavy focus, an infantry heavy build. The integrated support gets you in total an extra 50% soft attack for your support companies. So that's your artillery, your AA. Rockets are really strong, particularly for superior firepower, because again, it's given that extra 50% to basically double artillery, because your rocket artillery have got similar stats. So that's worth looking at as well. If you're going to be playing a bit more defensive, build up a lot of sort of crappy main infantry, but then sort of get really strong special forces, then Grand Battle Plan is good to go for as well. Or even if you're just going to be playing defensively, like the +10 entrenchment to begin with is super strong. Another thing that you can utilize, particularly if you have the No Step Back DLC, which brings in like the spirits for the officer corps, different ideologies have different benefits in here. Key ones that come to mind for any fascist nation in this middle one here for the spirit of the army: state serves the military, gets you extra political power and reduces your conscription law cost. If you're a communist nation, then this one would give you 500 weekly manpower, which over time, particularly if you get that early on in the game, that can amount to be quite a lot. That could be an extra few divisions that you can push out, which can make the difference. And then of course things like getting the industry liaisons for faster research speed for your air force. Yeah, again, like just ignore the Navy pretty much, but yeah, just like worth having a look through to see which one's going to help you out. So the justification's done on Ecuador. You can see that even though they're guaranteed, when you go to declare war, no potential enemies show up. I mean, particularly it's only really relevant in South America and Central America. That's how you can sort of know that you're not going to end up at war with the largest nation on Earth at this point. So, or the strongest rather. We may not be able to push these guys in straight away. Like we might have to concede a little bit of ground to sort of wear down their casualties and let them wear themselves out before we're actually able to attack them. They've only got 5,000 to 6,000 available manpower. You can just keep an eye on the war tab until they've taken that many casualties. Once they have, you'll see the strength of the division start to go down a little bit if you have the intel, and that's sort of how you know that you can attack. Another handy decision here, which is going to help you out: industrial land appropriation. That's going to be something which will pop up from time to time. You can take this decision for a little bit of political power, and in one of your states, it's going to add an extra building slot. Here we go. That's their almost 4,000 casualties. We jump back into the intel ledger. So they've got a little bit more manpower, but at this point, like, I know that we have the supremacy at this point, so we can easily just push them in. We have encircled and cut off this division here. In every case, it's always worth like destroying it. Like for one, it takes away that division. They'll have to retrain this, which is going to take them time and equipment and manpower, which they usually don't have. Once we destroy this one, we'll be able to bring the rest of our army back over to focus on what we actually want to take out. It's kind of like that Sun Tzu quote where like you only want to fight people on one front, that sort of thing. If you are struggling a little bit, then we've set up this little naval invasion here, just these troops that we've just now deployed. Again, you have to research the tech and everything, but once we have that set up and ready to go, even just the act of like these troops landing here, it's going to be, for one, attacking from multiple sides, but two, enough of a distraction that, you know, if these troops weren't right next to it, it would bring them away from their front line and spread them out a little bit, which is going to allow you to hopefully push a bit better on the fronts that you're already on. Another thing which you should keep in mind too is the power of using your planning bonus. When you're just constantly attacking, your divisions don't have enough time to build up a planning bonus. You can even use the staff office plan for this to increase a bit quicker, but you can see here that we've got max planning attack bonus 35%. If we open up the battle, you can see that the bonus we're getting a 35% like bonus to our attack just from that planning bonus alone, which is so significant. So sometimes it's worth just pausing your offensive, letting that planning bonus build up a bit, and it's going to give you a much better chance of actually winning. I was taking it easy just to sort of demonstrate different things you can do, but damn, Ecuador's turned out to be a bit of a tough nut to crack. There we go, they've finally fallen. Now, because they're obviously going to be a core state of ours, we're going to take them. But let me show you something. Okay, just for argument's sake, let's pretend that I've taken I've taken everything that we needed to do. We can go ahead and take this decision, which makes everything a core, changes our color, gives us a nice fun flag. It's going to give us a load of manpower, going to give us a bunch more factories and stuff like that as well. All of this is core territory, but we still don't have tons and tons of manpower. What happens if we took over a large nation, which is going to need a lot of like garrison support, like garrison manpower and equipment, which we simply don't have? You end up conquering a country that's quite large, you don't have a lot of manpower, and like, you know that if you take it all over, it's going to absolutely tank your manpower and everything and your equipment just from the garrisons alone. What you can do instead is just puppet the entire nation. Now that we've got the Peruvian Brazil as a puppet, what you can do is come into the division designer. Nope, that's not right. This button next to the division designer, click on Peruvian Brazil, and you actually get access to their templates. So we can go ahead and, I mean, this one looks like the best one. We'll go ahead and copy that. So this is using Brazilian manpower. Depending on like what their autonomy level is, what level of puppet they are, it's going to draw a majority of their manpower. So we can queue up like a bunch of these divisions here. It's using 7,000 of their manpower and only 1,000 of ours. So that's going to help you out a ton. So that can actually be a really handy way of taking advantage of a nation with a lot of manpower. Like, for example, you might be playing as Australia. This is something I've done a bit. You take over the Dutch East Indies, you don't have them cored, so it takes a lot of manpower to like suppress them and keep the garrison and everything. What you can do is like puppet one particular island of the Dutch East Indies where they've got like the most manpower. I think it is that one. I mean, just look at the amount of manpower they've got here. Anyway, you can just puppet them on one of these islands and just start drawing from their manpower like I've just shown you. And that's going to help you train an absolutely gigantic army, as well as still giving you use of a lot of their factories and stuff like that. So that's a little handy trick that you can do as well. Now, in terms of actually taking on the big boys, sometimes it can be in your best interest just to join a faction. Once the peace deal comes around, you're going to be able to take a large chunk of the US, or whatever your goal is anyway, particularly if you are like throwing a lot of men at the situation, particularly if it's men of like a puppet that you've just made. The more casualties you take, the more war score you get. So you can just use these like Brazilian divisions or the Indonesian divisions or whichever to try and get more war score to help you out in the end peace deal. Anyway, that's it for today. I just wanted to sort of throw that together for you guys to help you out a little bit with playing those minor nations. Let me know in the comments if there's anything that you think I've missed. Also, yeah, hope this helps you out. Let me know what playthroughs that you use this for and how you go with it. So yeah, thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you on the next one.